The topic today is this: from bystander to builder. From bystander to builder. Let's set the scene here just a little bit more. I want to build on what Peter shared last time. So if you missed that service, if you weren't here for whatever reason, go back and listen to last Sunday, because this is like all going to build on each other, no pun intended, right? It really ties in. So just a really quick recap of setting the scene. Jerusalem has been, almost at this point, 100 years has passed when somebody's come in, over 100 years, they've wrecked the walls. The people of Judea have been taken out of their homeland. Now, some of them have come back, they've rebuilt the temple. What breaks Nehemiah's heart, and what he heard in chapter 1, is that the walls of Jerusalem, the defensive structures, are still broken down. And that might not seem like a lot to us, because like if somebody rams into your fence with a car and breaks it down by accident, whoops, and insurance doesn't cover it, you're like, I don't have a fence, not a big deal, right? But if your house was surrounded by like coyotes all the time, and you had small dogs and a cat and everything else that was in the yard, the fence breaking down would be a big deal. And ultimately, that's the situation that anybody living in that time would experience, where there were bandits, there were people that were just like they would raid, right? And it was hard to track them down because they didn't have satellite imagery and GPS or whatever. Like you'd get robbed and nobody could do anything about it. There was wildlife, like mountain lions could come into the city and kill a kid, right? Like there was real danger that could happen when you had your walls, half demolished. But the challenge that we face here is the people that were living there didn't seem to care. Of all people that should care about the walls being demolished, about the fact that you can't live peacefully. I mean, and maybe they just, hey, my house, I'm over here, I'm in the city, I'm gonna build my own little wall, but the fact that the bigger wall was half destroyed, and it was like there were sections that were still complete, but there were obviously massive gaps, right? And they didn't care. The people that were there could care less. And Nehemiah is the story of some guy that's living 100 miles away, hundreds of miles away, in a cushy palace, right there by the king. Really nice career, really nice job, smart guy. Like he's got it good, relatively speaking. And he cares for what's happening in Jerusalem. These guys don't, but he does. And that's the setting here, folks, where we see this spirit of apathy that Nehemiah is addressing with his actions. A spirit of like passiveness, a spirit of like, it's just about me, I don't care about anybody else. A spirit of normalizing things that should break their heart. I was talking to one of our brothers that recently went to Europe, Greece, Spain, other places to do missions. And he was talking about like, hey, we planned out this huge project and we were gonna go, and I can't remember which country it was. Like we were gonna go do like this massive outreach and like street evangelism or whatever. And we called up the local churches. There's local Russian churches in that community. And they're like, hey, do you guys wanna join us? Like, we're gonna invite people to your church. Do you wanna be there? And they're like, no, good. You guys do it, Like, hold on, this is for you. No, that doesn't work for us. I remember we did another trip. This was my experience, maybe a decade ago now, maybe more, where we went to kind of northwestern Russia. And same thing, like we had maybe like 25, 30 teams of like 10 to 20 people from the U.S. come out there to do like all of this work that summer. And then like the local churches only had like 2 teams. And that was it. Even though there was obviously way more believers there. Like this was like we were inviting people to their churches and they were like, oh, just we'll host you guys and you guys do your thing and we'll applaud from the sidelines. I don't want to criticize any specific church or individual, and I don't know their situation. But man, that is prevalent. Like, we see that so much where somebody who's not involved, like that's not their part of the kingdom per se, but they care about it, and the person that's right there in that part of the kingdom could care less. Albert Einstein, as once said, as Europe was being ravaged by fascism, Nazis, communism, he made the statement: the world is a dangerous place, not because of those who do evil, but because of those who look on and do nothing. Because of those who look on and do nothing. And that's what's happening where, God sent, and we saw this timeline last time, where God sent multiple prophets to his people. Haggai, Amos, others, specifically to call out their apathy, to call the fact, like, guys, wake up. You're like not in a good place. This is bad for you spiritually, and ultimately it's bad it'll be bad for you physically. You've got to pay attention to this. And again and again and again, the people of Israel really didn't listen to it. Folks, we need the same message today, and that's what we're going to be talking about. How do we go from being bystanders to builders, to be actively engaged in the work of the kingdom that is in our yard, in our patch, where we are, not just like physically, but like you're mentally, where God's placed you, wherever you are. How do we go from bystanders to builders? To give you examples very practically, right? We all agree. We as a church, we want revival. Right? Can we just say amen? We want renewal. We want this congregation here. We want our Russian service to experience constant renewal, right? But, and I'm going to speak to you personally, brother and sister in here. Are you bothered by that? Like, is that your thing? I know Peter is praying. Pastor Peter prays about it all the time. Every time we meet, he's like, we're going to pray about revival. He cares about it very deeply. But do you care about that? About revival and renewal in this church, in our congregation? I know marriage is important. Your marriage, if you're married, your marriage is important. But is that something that, is it really important to you, or are you just kind of winging it? I know your relationship with your kids and how you're raising them is important. But are you intentional about it, or is it just like, we'll see where this goes? I've kept them alive. We'll see if they can live out. Is that something that you feel like, man, that burdens me? There's multiple reasons why the people in the time of Nehemiah didn't care. Why they were actionless, powerless, careless, numb. And I'm showing 5 here. There's probably more, but one, a lot of times we live in this apathy, and why they lived in this apathy is they didn't see the brokenness clearly, right? They've been living in these ruins for decades. So there's kids, they've had kids born in the ruins. They're used to oh yeah, of course the walls are broken down. That's fine, that's normal, that's not a big deal. We've survived, right? The survivor's bias. We've survived with the walls being broken down. We'll survive another generation. And so they've normalized things that should be painful, should be bad. And we say this is just the way things are. So, friend, if you're here today and you feel very unburdened and you feel very my life is technically fine, you might be in this category. If you don't feel God working in you and calling you and pushing you to say, man, there's something that we should be burdened by the kingdom. The world is broken. And if that doesn't bother us in some way in our life, we might be living in the ruins and we're like, it'll just all burn up anyway. Let it be. They were They didn't see that brokenness clearly. It didn't seem to affect them. 2, they felt overwhelmed by the size of the problem. At this point, the walls have been ruined for 141 years, folks. 141 years. And so it's been from generation to generation, and they've looked at it and said, it's too big, it's too much. Like how can we make this happen? It's too far gone. This is the way things are now. I can't fix it. 3, they might have felt opposition and resistance. We read as we go through Nehemiah 2, there's Sanballat and Tobiah and Geshem, right? These rulers that surrounded them, immediately around them, that said, hey, don't you start now. Don't start building the walls, because that's rebellion, and we're going to come and we're going to make sure that, because they needed open access into their homes to be able to tax them and attack them and rule over them and have power over them, and they didn't want them to have defense, right? And so we fear that today. We say, well, if I try to change, people won't understand me. People will criticize me. What if they disapprove? 4, they lacked a clear vision and a plan. There's people that might have looked at the walls and they're like, man, I wish this was fixed, but I'm no architect. I don't know what to do. There's nobody to show me what that first step is. And 5, they're maybe waiting for somebody else to do it. And man, that's so many folks today. That's so many folks today. Oh, God will send, my marriage is failing, but our parents will step in if it gets too bad, and they'll work it out. Oh, my kids are disobedient. I'll send them to Sunday school. That should fix them. The church it needs a revival, but luckily my pastor's praying for it. So good thing he's a prayer warrior. Just somebody else's problem. And it makes it so easy to process this, because you think, well, God, of course, he'll take care of it with somebody else. And you just distance yourself from that problem when it is your problem. The church, the congregation, your family, your marriage, your career, all of that's part of the kingdom. It's your problem. It's your burden, and it should be our burden. And so Nehemiah, as we get into chapter 2, shows us that rebuilding, or generally building, investing yourself into something, requires you to have a heart for it. It requires you to be prayerful, to seek God's guidance, to be prepared, to examine, to unite people, to inspire people. All of those things are what we're going to cover today. And so let's begin with the first point here as we dive into Nehemiah 2. Open your Bibles. We're going to go through the first 3 verses and kind of go through the rest of the chapter all together. The first point that I want to leave with you, what Scripture kind of gives us as a characteristic of a builder, somebody who cares, who actually creates change in their life for God's glory, is this: builders have a burden for what's broken. Builders have a burden for what's broken. Reading from Nehemiah chapter 2. In the month of Nisan, in the 20th year of King Artaxerxes, when wine was before him, I took up the wine and gave it to the king. Just pause here for just a quick second. Just so we understand Nehemiah's role, right? And I don't want to diminish it for like what it means. Nehemiah was a cupbearer, which was an important role in the Middle East in that time. It was more than just a sommelier who's like, oh, this wine is from, Israel, which you captured, sir. It wasn't about the taste or like really making sure the food pairings are great and had a 9-course meal or whatever. The guy, you didn't become the cupbearer because you knew everything about wine. You became the cupbearer because you were a really close confidant of the king. Oh, and by the way, you also served him the cup. And the reason is he had to trust you because you were going to protect him from being poisoned, right? So his first role was like being the wine taster, if you will, and just to give you well, who's going to try to do that? That would be foolish. Do you guys know how Alexander the Great died? Who knows? They say he was probably poisoned. So that's a thing that happened, right? It's a real danger. Like somebody poisoned his food or his wine. So he was there, and he would sip the wine and taste the food and make sure it wasn't poisoned. And thank goodness our waiters don't do that today, right? Just lean over and sip your water for you. You're good, sir. That would be awkward. But they needed that at that time. 2 is he was a close advisor because he was put into this position because he was close to the king. He was to be trusted. You needed somebody who wasn't going to pretend like sip your wine for you because you needed to know if it was poison. So this was somebody that the king really trusted this guy. He knew Nehemiah would lay his life down for him if it came down to it. He knew he was going to shoot him straight, that he cared for him, he would be honest with him, and he was a close advisor. And 3, he managed the king's household. So when you're in that position, you're in essence the head butler of everything that happened there, right? So he would arrange like provisions, right? He was a logistics expert. He made sure that, whatever seasonally it was there. Like he knew how to run the palace from that position. So I just want to be very clear. This wasn't just like some tasting guru. This guy had a lot of administrative duties along with being a close confidant who would put his life down for the king. So that's who Nehemiah was. Let's keep going. Now Nehemiah says, I had not been sad in his presence. So he was like, I was a consummate professional. Like I did my job well, and never once did I mess up, if you will, by I had control over my emotions. I was disciplined. And the king said to me, why is your face sad, seeing you are not sick? This is nothing but sadness of the heart. Then I was very much afraid. What he did was he broke a protocol. Right? You don't come before the king who has a million problems of his own, right? He's got millions of people that all need something from him, and then you're over there giving him another thing to worry about because the guy that's supposed to be protecting his wine and his life isn't happy. And when you, of all disgruntled employees, you don't want the guy that's protecting you to be disgruntled, right? You want that guy to be like, no, I'm bought in, king, I'm on your side. So hey, what's happening, Nehemiah? And I said to the king, let the king live forever, Nehemiah says. Why should not my face be sad when the city, the palace of my father's graves, lies in ruins and its gates have been destroyed by fire? Builders have a burden for what's broken. Before anything can be done, before any project starts, before anything gets kicked off, somebody must feel the weight of what has been lost and what is absent. You guys hear this? It doesn't just happen by itself. Somebody needs to feel that weight. Somebody needs to feel a burden for doing something. We read in Nehemiah 1:4, he says, as soon as I heard these words, I sat down and wept and mourned for days. I continued fasting and praying before the God of heaven. He felt that he immediately took on that burden. The reality is, just very practically here, folks, if you don't care about something, you're just not going to do it, or you're going to do it poorly, right? That's the how we live. I don't think Anna's going to kill me over this, but my wife and I, Anna and I, are often late to events, but very different events. So, I apologize in advance, especially to Anna's friends, but when she organizes an event, and it's usually like, hey, we're going to go hang out with my group of people, I'm probably not going to be in a hurry to get ready. Of all things, I've got other 50 things to do. Oh, fine, we'll just leave on time, or we'll get there. 5-10 minutes, it won't kill anybody. 2 hours late, don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. When it's my event and my friends, she's not in a hurry to get ready. And I'm like, no, let's go, look at the time. She's like, yeah, but I've still got to, cook a meal. We're already 5 minutes late. No, but it's just like, I love her friends. I'm sure they're great people. Most of them. No, I kid. They're fantastic. They're great. But I'm not on fire to go hang out with them necessarily, and I'm sure she's not on fire to necessarily go hang out with my friend group, even though we all love and appreciate and everybody's kind and nice and everything's fine. But it's what you really care about, right? It's what you're really passionate about. And that's what you really want. No, let's go, let's hurry up, let's get there early because this is important for me. Same thing here, folks. If you don't have that burden, You're just a bystander. And your wife's like, oh, come on, let's go. Why are you not dressing the kids already? But when you have a burden, then you're the builder. You're the one that's going out there. Let's go, kids. Let's get dressed. Let's get in the car. Let's get out of here. Let's run. We're going to be there on time. We're going to be there early. We're going to be prepared. You have to carry the burden. But an important thing to note here also is nobody's born with the burden, and nobody's born a builder. You don't just, this doesn't something that automatically happens to you. You do become one though, right? Nehemiah wasn't a city planner. He wasn't an architect. He wasn't a civil engineer. He wasn't part of that council, and he wasn't the governor of Israel. Like, this had zero to do with his responsibilities, zero. It was so far outside of what he was supposed to be doing or what he was an expert in, like none. But when God placed the burden on his heart, everything else started to fall into place, right? Like, God does that, where he says, hey, you're burdened. This is where it starts. You start to care for something, and then everything else will happen. But it starts with that. When you start to care for the state of the church, when you start to care for revival and renewal, when you start to care for your well-being, the well-being of your kids, right? Like the spiritual well-being, if you will, the well-being of your family. Everything else happens from there, but it starts with caring about it, becoming a priority. It starts with carrying that burden. And I also want to encourage you again, for those, if some of you care deeply about really important things, right? You're there, and you don't know what the next step is. You don't know where God's leading you with this, and that's fine, right? Nehemiah didn't start with a blueprint. He started with a burden, right? He didn't start with a solution. He started with humility. He was investing himself emotionally before he had any kind of physical tools or means. So don't ignore the burden that God's placed on your heart. Lean into it and pray about it, as we'll read in a second. But also, if you carry zero burden, guys, don't be like the people in Israel where the walls are broken down. Their kids might be getting eaten by mountain lions every once in a while, and yet they're fine. Somebody else will take care of it. Is your heart burdened for the things that burden God in your life? Carry that. Understand what that looks like. We're going to continue in Nehemiah. Point number 2, builders pray before they act, just starting from verse 4. Then the king said to me, so what are you requesting? So I prayed to the God of heaven, key verse here, and I said to the king, if it pleases the king, and if your servant has found favor in your sight, that you send me to Judah, to the city of my father's graves, that I may rebuild it. One of the key characteristics of a builder, and something that was important to Nehemiah, I love that the book really highlights this, he always prays first. He always prays first. Right? Beginning with chapter 1. Who here tried the Acts prayer method, by the way, from last time? I'm seeing some hands. Okay. I'll broaden the question. Who became more intentional in their prayer after last Sunday? Okay, more hands. That's great. Yeah, Acts is not the end all be all. I hope I didn't hurt your feelings. It's a good framework, but just being more intentional. He was very intentional. I also want to make sure that we're clear. When we see this small prayer before he answers the king, this isn't how he lived his life, small prayer here, a little snacker of prayers, right? The reason the chapter mentions what month it is because the first chapter mentions what month it is, and it's been 4 months since he started praying. He's been praying for 4 months leading up to this moment. And in fact, if you go look through the book of Nehemiah, guys, constant prayer, 12 times, chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 4, chapter 6, chapter 9. It's just prayer after prayer after prayer after prayer. And you're like, I just want to read about Jerusalem being rebuilt. He's like, no, we're going to pray first. That's how Jerusalem was built, on prayer. He keeps coming back always. It's not about the plan, it's about the prayer. People want to go build, and he says, no, we're going to pray first. It's never the afterthought, folks, hear me. It's the foundation of the building process. And that really struck me. Guys, before you do anything, before you rebuild your life, before you rebuild your family, before you build up the relationship with the kids, before you build up a family and try to get married, before you build your career, before the church can be built, it has to start with intense prayer, prolonged prayer, dedicated prayer. This is really cool. He prayed for 4 months before he talked to the king about this. 4 months. The building process itself took 52 days. He prayed for twice as long and more than it took to actually execute the task. Twice as long to execute. He spent more time in prayerful preparation than in physical execution. Prayer prepares the builder. I was listening to a Mark Driscoll message recently, and he was talking about, coincidentally, on Nehemiah, and he realized, he said, it takes me a few hours to prepare a sermon. I don't know how he does it that fast, but he said a few hours to prepare a sermon. But he says, it takes another few hours to prepare the messenger. The message takes a few hours and another few hours for the messenger. It takes just as long to prepare the preacher as it takes to prepare the message. Just as long, right? So if it takes me 10 hours to prepare a message, it should take me 10 hours of just prayer, God working in me to do this effectively, to do this the right way, right? If it takes you, and you just translate that, you're trying to build up your children, right? You're gonna do that for years. You're trying to have that conversation with them, right? How much prayer should happen? The reality is a lot of times it's the other way around. You just react. Your kids do something, you react. Oh, and then I'll pray afterward. Afterward, I'll pray, but now you're like, well, now I've ruined things because it just made the situation work. Something happens with your spouse, you react. Oh, now you have to pray and ask for forgiveness, right? Something happens with your business or your career, you make a decision, and then it all falls apart. Oh, and now you're praying. It's always afterward that we pray. We remember that we should have prayed after the decision's made, after the thing is done, instead of spending all that time building the foundation and saying, I'm not gonna make a decision until I've prayed it through forwards and backwards, sideways and upwards and down, just really pray through this. And then I have the conversation, then I make the decision, then I take action and spend just as much time in prayer, if not more, than you would doing said action. Bring your plans to God before moving forward. Live in prayer. Make it be the foundation of your life. Let's keep going. Nehemiah, verse 6. And the king said to me, the queen sitting beside him, how long will you be gone? And when will you return? This is classic, asking for PTO, what days do you have off? How many days do you have left? So it pleased the king to send me when I had given him a time. And he says, if it pleases the king, let the letters be given me to the governors of the province beyond the river, that they may let me pass through until I come to Judah. And a letter to Asaph, the keeper of the king's forest, that he may give me timber to make beams for the gates of the gates of the fortress of the temple, and for the wall of the city, and for the house that I shall occupy. And the king granted me what I asked, for the good hand of my God was upon me. For those of you that have never read the book Tell to Win, I highly recommend it. It's by Peter Guber, who's a well-known Hollywood executive and CEO, and it's all about storytelling. It's a really cool story, but part of that, he gives some leadership advice. And he talks for anybody here that's a leader or aspires to be a leader, either like a business leader, anything else, or you're a leader of your kids. So he says, when people come to you and they bring you their problems, right? Your employees come to you and they're like, hey boss, this thing's wrong. Hey mom and dad, this thing's wrong. And you can fix it, which is unwise. But what you should do is just say, well, how would you fix it? Right? Like they bring you their quote unquote monkey and you say, take the monkey back. How would you do it? Right? And a smart employee, and many of you guys here are employed, this is great career advice for you, you've already thought about that. And so you say, well, boss, I would do X, Y, Z, and I've analyzed this, and we should do this. And then if that's not possible, I would just do this. A not smart employee, which that's none of you, you would never do this, would say, well, that's your problem, boss. Your company, I'm just telling you it's wrong, like you fix it, right? Nehemiah was a smart employee in this case, right? He was a good leader in his own right, but good leaders are always good followers too, right? So he's prepared, right? He's thought about this. He's been praying through this. And so when the guy says, well, how would you fix this? He says, well, I'm glad you asked. And he says, I need permission to go to Jerusalem. And you know how many PTO days he needed? 12 years. Just casual, paid time off. He gave him a clear timeline. He's like, I need letters of authority. I need your endorsement on this. I need resources. By the way, you're paying for this. And then I need a place to live when I get there. It's a big ask, but he was prepared. Builders are prepared for success. It doesn't surprise them. He wasn't shocked. I mean, that moment, maybe he wasn't expecting the king maybe in that moment, but man, was he ready with an answer. He's like, I know exactly what you need. Here's the brief. Here's the plan. I've got an idea exactly. I've prayed through this. I am ready for the next step. I am ready for where you would lead me, Lord. The thing to note here is this was not the first time this particular king was asked for the same thing. This was actually the second time. There's a passage in the Bible that talks about when he was asked initially, he refused. But Nehemiah, God working through him, was prepared. He asked at the right time, prayed through it, and the king said yes. This point immediately where my mind went to, for those of you today that are single, I'm not gonna ask you to raise your hand. I should, but I won't, because it wouldn't be nice if we all knew who it was so we could pray for you and you guys could find each other. But for those of you that are single, right? And you're thinking, oh, I'm gonna start dating, or maybe you're dating and you're thinking of getting engaged, or you're engaged and you're thinking of getting married. How intentional are you in this process, right? Like, do you think it just happens? Like, oh, she likes me enough as I am. She'll like me for the rest of eternity, right? I'll change her. I'll change him. You have to be prepared for success. You should be in a place of getting ready, right? In prayer, preparing yourself for that step so that when you have that conversation, you say, hey, I'm ready. I have an idea for what I want life to look like. I've prepared this. I've done this. I've paid off my loans. I've got an education, or I've started a thing and I'm doing this and I've got an idea for that. And you're prepared for success versus, hey, can we go out and can you pay? On the guy's side. Girls, you can say that. But you have to be ready. Are you structuring your life, your attitude, your knowledge, right, around that? Same thing for having kids. You're like, we want to start a family, we want to have kids. Are you preparing for success? Are you preparing to build something and you're invested in it, right? What about your spouse, your romantic relationships, or your career, right? I think we forget a lot of times our jobs are part of God's kingdom. Like, you're not just by accident a truck driver, or you're not by accident a student, or you're not by accident, a computer engineer, or, a marketing manager, or whatever else you do. There's so much talent here, right? But you're not there by accident. Like, God's using you in that kingdom. Like, do you think Nehemiah was a cupbearer by accident? No, he's like, God, you intentionally put me here for a purpose. Esther, same thing, which was a generation before Nehemiah. She was there intentionally. Like, oh, I didn't become the king this is great, I got a promotion. God puts you where you are intentionally. That means you prepare that piece of the kingdom. You work in that piece of the kingdom. You're burdened for that piece of the kingdom. You pray for that piece of the kingdom where you are at. God uses you there. You pray and you prepare. You do it in obedience. You do it in faith. And that's how you become a builder that's successful. Builders are prepared for success. Let's keep reading Nehemiah verse 9. And we're then going to skip to 19 as well. Then I came to the governors of the province beyond the river and gave them the king's letters. Now the king had sent with me officers of the army and horsemen. And when Sanballat the Horonite and Tobiah the Ammonite servant heard this, it displeased them greatly that someone had come to seek the welfare of the people of Israel. Verse 19, and then when Sanballat the Horonite, and just to give you guys context, so where Sanballat is located is right north of Jerusalem. He's in Samaria, right? So Samaria was strong in this time, right? He's right north of Jerusalem. Tobiah the Ammonite is east of Jerusalem in modern day Jordan, and Geshem the Arab was south of Jerusalem by the Dead Sea and kind of the Saudi Arabia area. So it's all the three kingdoms, right? It's like Mexico and Canada and, Europe and Japan on either side, right? For us, right? They're the people that are right there. And so when they heard this, they jeered at us and despised us and said, what is this thing that you are doing? Are you rebelling against the king? And then I replied to them, the God of heaven will make us prosper, and we his servants will arise and build, but you have no portion or right or claim in Jerusalem. Builders expect opposition. They're not surprised by it. They lean into it. They know that Satan is constantly tearing things down. But you know where Satan works especially hard? Is where you're trying to build up. Where builders are working, Satan is working double time. He's trying to figure out how to get in the way. If Nehemiah had stayed in Persia and done nothing, he would have had no clue who these guys are even. Like maybe he would have just known them by name because he's helping the king with admin stuff. Those guys would have never talked to him. But now that he's there, now that he's stepped out in faith, all of a sudden resistance appeared. And Nehemiah didn't let it stop him, folks. Here's like a couple of like really easy bullet points to jot down. He didn't get defensive. He let God fight this for him. He just said, I'm not dealing with you guys. He didn't get distracted. He stayed on task, and he didn't get discouraged, right? His burden, his prayer, all of that fueled him. So it was like, I'm fine with opposition. Opposition follows opportunity. All the time. There's never easy opportunity. There's always opposition, especially when you're doing it for the kingdom. Rebuilders, builders, don't waste time arguing with critics. They keep building. They trust God to handle the opposition. I want to recognize that many of us are building. Many of us here are builders. You're investing in your family intentionally. Maybe you're investing in your relationship with your spouse. Maybe you're investing in getting married. You're dating, or you're getting engaged. Maybe you're investing in this church. Praise God for that. Maybe you're investing in your career for God's glory. I know the feeling of discouragement when you're investing yourself into the kingdom, and then somebody comes and tells you, like, why are you wasting your time? Like, this is such a waste of your time and talents. Like, why are you even doing this, right? You're investing in your marriage, and then you go online and every piece of advice is like, you should leave him or you should leave her. Why are you guys even trying? Think about yourself. Nobody cares to work through issues anymore. I know how Satan sends us distractions right at the moment when you're doing the most important building work. Right when it really matters. You want to read with your kids? Somebody calls you. You want to pray? It's daylight savings time. You oversleep. You want to take your wife on a date? Your car breaks down. Now you need to spend all that money on brake pads, whatever. Those are not cheap. Something always happens right when you're trying to do something, right? It's always a distraction. I know that Satan wants us to be very busy defending ourselves, distracted, discouraged, and defending ourselves when we try to build so things would slow down. I remember when we were, I used to do youth work at this church, and over a decade ago, and with Peter at that time, and we were one of the first kind of experiments we tried was switching our youth services from Russian to English, in kind of acknowledgement of the fact that a lot of the young folks that were going to these youth services had been born here. English was now their primary language, and we wanted to reach them with the gospel in their kind of home language, if you will. And we faced opposition, and there were questions about like your integrity, right? And you expect that. And you power through that. But man, you can waste so much time defending yourself. Like, no, I'm not trying to make your kids leave God. We're giving them the gospel. It's just a different language. It's the same God, it's the same word, right? But you spend so much time fighting empty battles. And Satan wants you involved here so that you're not doing work there. Expect resistance if you start leading your family in faith. Expect obstacles if you start serving in ministry. Expect spiritual warfare if you're living on mission. Expect opposition. Let's go to verse 11. So I went to Jerusalem and I was there 3 days. And then I arose in the night, I and a few men with me, and I told no one what my God had put into my heart to do for Jerusalem. Nobody knows about his plan yet. He's just arrived. He's some guy from court. All right, well, we'll listen to you. Everybody's kind of on edge. And he just goes out at night. There was no animal with me, but the one which I rode. It wasn't a big procession. It was just a couple of guys. I went out by night by the valley gate to the dragon springs, to the dung gate. I inspected the walls of Jerusalem that were broken down and its gates that had been destroyed by fire. Then I went on to the fountain gate in the king's pool, but there was no room for the animal that was under me to pass. It was just so much rubble that they couldn't even get through it. Then I went up in the night by the valley and inspected the wall, and I turned back and entered by the valley gate, and so returned. And the officials did not know where I had gone or what I was doing, and I had not yet told the Jews, the priests, the nobles, the officials, the rest who were to do the work. Jerusalem had a lot of different people there. There were nobles, people that got left behind after the invasion. Usually they take everything, but some nobles stayed, I guess. The officials, the Jews, just all these groups. Nobody knew. Nehemiah is doing what builders do, which is examine before executing. He needed to examine the situation before he told anybody any kind of verdict, before he tried to get anything off the ground. He's been praying through it. He's been burdened by this. He's been prepared for this. But a key part of this now is you need to get in and examine, right? He's heard about the destruction, but now he's there and he needs to personally inspect the damage. That word in Hebrew, chakar, meaning to examine carefully, to probe, to investigate. He didn't just take someone's word for it. He went in and saw the condition. Guys, it's just a really smart, just leadership technique, right? You just never like, oh, this is a problem, we'll go fix it. You go and say like, can you show me the data? Is this really the problem? Oh no, the data shows us something different. That was just your experience. It's not that bad, right? Or in counseling, all the time, counseling or conflict resolution work, whether you do it professionally or in a church, right? It's always like somebody comes and they tell you the story and you're like, wow, this person that did that to you is a monster. How could they, like, oh my, this is unbelievable. And it's so easy to just immediately pass judgment, like you're done for. But then you bring in the other person and they're like, whoa, there is context. Let me tell you what they did first and why that was my response. And you're like, okay, you guys are both at fault. You're both monsters. Because that's who we are. We're all sinful, right? You listen to everything. You figure out what the real situation on the ground is. You get the data, you dig into it, and then you have the wisdom to plan the right course of action. This applies to us, right? That piece of examination. And I think this is like one of the pieces that's often skipped because we're just so enthusiastic and we're all such nice people and we want to do things for the Lord. And so we just like, let's just jump in. We've prayed for it. We have a burden for it. Let's just go fix stuff, right? And it helps to just take a step and be a little bit more strategic and examine. So to give you an example, if you have a burden for the revival at this church, for renewal at this church. And I'm just giving you an example. Have you taken the time to maybe chat with the people that are coming in super late or leaving super early and understanding what motivates them? And so if you were planning to leave super early today, don't, because I just called you out. You should stay here for the whole time and worship with us till the end. If you have a burden for your family, when's the last time you had an honest conversation with the family members about where their spiritual condition is and say, hey, what do you need? What's going on in your life? Like spiritually, don't ask them like if you need money. They always need money. But like, what do you need spiritually? What's happening? How can we grow as a family? Examine what's going on. If you have a burden for having a God-glorifying career, have you gone out and seen people that glorify God in their career? Have you come up to a business leader and said, hey man, I want to see how you run your business for the glory of God, right? Go talk to, some of you guys know Mosley Collins, 444. You guys know? Yes? Like, I love that guy because he preached here a few times, probably 6, 7 years ago. And I mean, speaking of like God glorifying, you see all these other lawyers with all their billboards, and then you call Mosley and he's like, we proclaim God's word, and by the way, I'm also a lawyer, right? Just like straight up worshiping God through that, right? I love, I don't know, Greg's not here, is he? But like Greg walking into Dr. Greg Tavasen's office, and like the first thing there is like Jesus washing the feet of like some person. And you're like, I get that. That speaks to me. Like, this is why he's doing it. He's leaning in to his calling of the kingdom. Oh, and by the way, he also like fixes people's feet and stuff, right? That's awesome. That's where we want to be. You're not just a Subway artist or a sandwich artist. You're a believer that helps feed people and proclaim the word. And by the way, you also make great sandwiches, mediocre sandwiches because of the ingredients, but you do your job well, right? You do good things. How do you glorify God wherever it is that you are? How is it that and I look at Jesus, the first 30 years of his life, what did he do? Just examined. He lived in the human condition. He lived like everybody else. He had a job. He helped his parents. He lived with his brothers and sisters. And before he executed 3.5 years of highly effective ministry, he examined. He prayed. He was burdened by it, but he was in a place of like, I'm gonna figure this out. I'm gonna really invest in this so that then the Lord can use me. Last point, we'll read from Nehemiah 17. And then I said to them, you see the trouble we are in, how Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. And I told them of the hand of my God that had been upon me for good, and also of the words that the king had spoken to me. And they said, let us rise up and build. So they strengthened their hands for the good work. Nehemiah didn't try to go about this work alone. And for some of you, I know for me, that's really hard. I am very much like, if I can just take care of it myself, I'll take care of it myself. And delegation takes extra effort, and then you have to deal with like subpar results, and how do you deal with that, right? So you just want to do it yourself. But Nehemiah knew, and he was intentional in bringing people to the cause and say, no, we're gonna do this together. Come, let us rebuild the wall of Jerusalem. I'm sure I've shared this story with you before, but it's like one of my favorite, like just kind of mindset shifts. It's kind of an old saying. It says, if you want to sail the seas, experience the world, collect great wealth, you could do it one of two ways. You can go back to your village and pay everybody a lot of money to learn how to build ships, and then pay everybody a lot of money to build the ship, and then pay them a lot of money to go be sailors on that ship so that you can go out and sail. That's one way. Or you can come back to your village and tell them about how awesome it feels to be out there on the sea. And the unspeakable riches that lie in lands afar. And how it would benefit them and how much they'll enjoy it, and just let them get caught up in the same fire that burns you. You know what happens? They'll build you the ship, They'll sail with you. They'll be a part of those journeys and adventures. That's how you inspire people. You come in and you share with them your burden and what God's, guys, it's very interesting. As you go through these verses, everything that we've covered to date, he covers here. All right, like here, listen. He says, you see the trouble we are in. That's the burden. How Jerusalem lies in ruins with its gates burned. That's his examination. Come, let us build the wall of Jerusalem that we may no longer suffer derision. That's the opposition. The hand of my God has been upon me for good. That's been his prayer. This whole time, God's been working in him. Also, of the words that the king had spoken to me, that's the preparation, right? The king and him had made agreements. They've prepared. And they said, let us rise up and build. And that's the inspiration. You guys see that? All of it tied together right at the end of the chapter, where everything he's experienced, he says, here's what God's done. I've prepared and I've prayed and God's burdened me and I've examined. Here it is. And they said, yes, we too now have that burden. Let us now go build. Let us do it. Let us. Come on, Nehemiah, we're going to do it. Now they've caught that same fire. As you look to be a builder, as you want to build, as you're burdened, as you're praying, as you're trying to figure out what you're going to do, think also about who needs to be involved. And maybe you don't involve them too early, but at some point you start to share what God is doing in your heart. You start to share the burden and the prayer and your examination and your plans and the opposition and how you're responding to it. I remember when I went on my first missions trip. And the reason I went on my first missions trip, when my good friend and mentor, Pastor Mike Savin, many of you guys know him, we would go to youth conferences and guess what he would share? This. And he would share his burden for the people of Russia. And he would share the prayers, and he would share the preparing and the planning and the successes and the oppositions. And the oppositions were the best part of all. When he's like, well, we had cops that came in and tore down our tent. So we went to, they were in St. Petersburg. Literally, the cops were one like subway ride behind them. They would get to like a subway station. They would play a song, preach the word in 5 minutes, get on the subway, go to the next one, and the cops would arrive right on their tracks. And they did all of St. Petersburg like in a day like that. And I was like, this is awesome. I want to be a part of a mission that faces opposition because it's so effective, right? You want to lean into that. That's what lights you. You're just like, let us go build the wall. Let us go build the kingdom. I want to go build the family. I want to go build a life. I want to go build a career that glorifies God. It's easier to do that when your family's bought in and your family says, yeah, we're all in. Let's go build the wall. When your coworkers, your boss, maybe they're bought in. Not always. Maybe they're of the opposition. That's fine too. When your spouse is bought in, when your friends are bought in, when your mentors are bought in. What a different life from a life of apathy. Where we started chapter 2 and those people were fine with the walls being destroyed. Who cares? And now they're saying, let's go build. Let's go do something. 150 years of apathy, 170 years of apathy, gone. Let's actually build. Now we want to invest. Now we want to do something. Folks, I'll conclude with just a New Testament illustration that Jesus left us, right? When he was talking about the church. And he left us an example of the 10 virgins, right? 5 wise. I wish it was 10 wise. 5 wise and 5, say it, foolish, unwise. Right? There were 5 that cared. They're like, I don't know when the bridegroom's coming, so we're gonna have enough oil, and our wick's gonna be trimmed, and you know what? We're maybe gonna take turns sleeping so that like everybody can wake up, and we're gonna be ready. Right? They maybe had a nap during the day before, so they were like, we're gonna be up all night. We're gonna make sure that this is a great celebration. And then there were 5 that this wasn't really important to them. Just they're there, like we got invited, We're here for the appetizers and the after party, and we'll have oil. Like if anything, we'll borrow some, who cares? And the bridegroom will come eventually, and oh man, I've been up all night the night before, so I need to get some rest, so you guys just wake me up when the bridegroom comes. They just whatever. What was their end? They ran out of oil. They had to go buy it. By the time they got to the celebration, they weren't let in. Guys, we've got to think about that now, right? Builders don't just show up and everything's just magically happening. Your family doesn't get fixed by itself. Your career doesn't get fixed by itself. Your life doesn't get fixed by itself. This church doesn't get fixed by itself. It happens intentionally through the burden in your heart, through the prayer that you go through the preparation, examination, and overcoming of obstacles, and inspiring others to join the work. It happens because of people like you. Right now, the people here in this room, every single one of you, buying into that vision, buying into what the word is giving you, what Christ calls you to, and saying, be wise, because the bridegroom is coming. That means you have to do. It's not just, hey, I'm saved by grace. Go buy the oil. Go prepare the lamp. Get some sleep. Get some rest. Have a snack. Be ready for when the bridegroom comes. Be a builder. Don't live in apathy. That is our call today, folks. Let's stand and we're going to pray. I'm going to give you a moment of just silent prayer, especially because we've been talking about prayer. Guys, do not just stand here right now. Pray. If you don't have a burden in your heart, pray. Where is God calling you to participate? Pray for this church. Pray for this congregation. Pray for the people that are standing right next to you right now. Nobody here has a perfect relationship with God. You're not Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden. We're very far from that. Pray for yourself and your relationship and your spiritual growth. I'm just going to give you a minute of just prayer and then I'll conclude. Jesus, we thank you for your grace. We thank you for your sacrifice, that you've brought us into this church family through your death on the cross, Lord. You've shown us a better way. You've brought us into life. Lord, and you brought us into life not for us to live in apathy and disinterest and passiveness, but you brought us into light so that we would truly also become a light, so that we would become builders of your church, so that we become builders of our families, of relationships, of careers, businesses, of success in this community, Lord. Builders spiritually, builders of the kingdom, Lord, and yet just you know us and you know how we are, and we just get so comfortable with living with the walls torn down, with our defenses down, with our spiritual life in shambles, with our families broken sometimes, just the relationship, everything. We live in damage and we're used to it. And Lord, I pray for forgiveness, and I know we all pray, Lord, just do not let us sit passively. Don't let us get comfortable. Don't let us normalize sin. Let it break us and let it burden us. Let it lead us to prayer, intentional, long-term, foundational prayer. And let us lead us to prepare, to examine, to overcome opposition, and to inspire others to build your kingdom, to build upon what you've already created, to strengthen the church through your Spirit and for your glory, Lord. Work in us, Lord. That's all we ask. Move us to perfection. Sanctify us. Make us more like you every day so we can live in obedience for your glory. Amen.